Hi folks, I've got a little bit of a vague sort of, not necessarily a rant, but more of a waffle to give here today uh, on a subject that I keep hearing from a lot of other guys that I speak to, guys I know who watch movies and comments I'm seeing online and so on. People talking about that strong male characters seem to be disappearing from movies. And I've sort of noticed this myself over the years, although personally I've sort of been more on the vibe that strong characters are disappearing from movies altogether. And hence, I said this about a month ago in a video that I did about superhero movies, and I was saying that the extreme popularity of superhero movies seems to be a compensation for the lack of intelligent and credible realistic heroes in movies. People are switching to the superhero brand because they're not getting characters who are convincing heroes. And the movies that do have attempts to create hero characters that are not superheroes, they seem to fail because the characters just simply aren't intelligent enough, or there's something missing with them anyway. The actors aren't charismatic enough either in a lot of cases. So I wrote down various thoughts on this, and I haven't necessarily reached specific conclusions on the subject, but I just wanted to throw some thoughts out there and get you guys into a bit of a dialogue in the comments section about this, because it's a subject I haven't really made my mind up on. Now, the first issue I want to mention about this is that I think there's a different differentiation that has to be made between physically strong male characters and male characters who are strong in terms of personality, in terms of values, and especially in terms of intelligence. For me, when I say that strong male characters seem to be disappearing from movies, and when I hear that from other people, I don't think it necessarily means that, hey, we need to get back the Schwarzenegger types and the Sylvester Stallone types, the muscle men. We need to get real big muscle men back into movies. I don't think that's what it's all about. Because if you go back before the 80s, you go to the 60s and 70s, when you had tough guys in movies then, some of them were a little bit ripped. I mean, Charles Bronson, if you ever watched the movie Hard Times, also known as The Street Fighter, Bronson, when he had his shirt off in that movie and he's fist fighting people, man, he had one hell of a physique on him. And Bruce Lee had an incredible physique as well, but not in the huge, stocky, I'm going to lift a car and throw at you kind of way. So I kind of think of the big, super muscular heroes of the Schwarzenegger Stallone variety. I kind of think of them as being veering off into superhero territory, where these guys are endowed with amazing physical strength, and therefore they beat the bad guys on the basis of that. To me, that's just, they're almost like superheroes. Now I'm talking more about like the strong male characters, like the ones that would get played by Clint Eastwood, Steve McQueen, Charles Bronson. A really, really good example would be Kurt Russell's character, R.J. McCready in The Thing. I particularly like that character because his strengths are about his intelligence, his cunning. It's not about physical muscles, and it's not about being able to pull a gun and shoot somebody. He doesn't even fire it. Oh yeah, he does fire a gun in one scene in that movie, but his heroics in that movie are definitely not of the shoot 'em up variety. So he's a really good character. It's just, for me, what's really missing is not the physical strength aspect, it's the intelligence of the characters. I've hardly seen any intelligent lead male characters for a long time. I can barely even remember when the last one was. There have been some examples. I've talked about these ones as being recent sort of action movies that I liked, was Dredd and Jack Reacher. In both of those movies, the lead male character had some sort of intelligence that, they were able to think their way out of certain situations and so on. Maybe it doesn't totally apply to those two movies, but there was at least an element of it anyway. So yeah, that's the first thing for me, is that it's not the muscular strength of the characters, it's the lack of intelligence and the lack of personal integrity that goes with the characters. And as maybe we could say courage. I don't know if that would really apply, because we still do get sort of male lead hero characters in movies who they show courage, but for me it's usually not convincing, because the courage is based upon themselves having superhero powers or whatever. I mean, I really loved the action movie Upgrade, the sci-fi action movie Upgrade. That was from a year or two ago. That was a great movie, but the lead character was just an everyday guy, and it was circumstance that gave him the powers that he has in the movie. In fact, he doesn't even take responsibility for carrying out the action scenes. It's an implant in his brain, in his spine, that controls his body and carries out the action scenes with computer precision. So I don't think that character even really applies, even though it's a great movie. But like I say, I do actually think this isn't just a problem for male characters. I think it's a problem with women characters as well. There is a big effort from a lot of film studios to try and push this idea of strong female characters. Now, that in itself is not a problem at all. I think when you get guys complaining that modern sort of action movies push too hard at female empowerment, they may complain about that, but I don't think that is their problem, what they're really complaining about. Because we had female empowerment action stars going way back. We had, I've talked about this one before, my favourite female empowerment action character is Ellen Ripley in the movie Aliens. She was brilliant. That was a true female empowerment character. But yet when that movie came out, and ever since, I've never heard any men complain, oh, I don't like that movie because it's just a female empowerment propaganda movie. I've not heard that from anybody. Pretty much everybody loves that film. And the ones who don't like it, it's not because of the female lead character. So we did have lead female characters who were very, very tough and strong in some older action movies and so on. Although strong lead characters doesn't have to be action movies. It can be thrillers, it can be dramas and so on. But we did have strong female characters. But men weren't complaining about it because there was also strong male lead characters. So I think today, a lot of guys are getting the idea that, hey, why is it that we're not having strong male characters, intelligent, respectable male lead characters, but you're trying very hard to push the female ones down our throat? I think it's the absence of the male ones that is making them complain about the female ones. So I think that's quite an important point. Another issue is, like I say, I think that strong characters have been disappearing from movies altogether across both genders. There are a lot of efforts to create these very strong female characters, but for me, the efforts are so artificial, so weak, so false that they lack credibility. Especially when you see a woman who weighs half the size of a man and doesn't have a big muscle mass, is running around and beating up a bunch of guys. I mean, it's kind of fun when you get a movie like, Angelina Jolie in the first Tomb Raider film, which was moderately enjoyable for a one-off watch. And I suppose, the video game nostalgia probably gives me that point of view because I love the Tomb Raider games. But when you get these movies where women are being given excessive physical strength that they don't actually have in the real world, it just makes those strong female characters lack credibility. So there's a major weakness there. And then you've got the superhero movies where the characters, their strength comes not from their personality, but from the fact that they've got these inherent superpowers and so on. And that stuff is really boring. But it's been getting so stupid. I've watched some movies where, especially among some of the superhero films, where you've now got little girl characters fighting and beating up grown men. Logan, that movie, for some reason the critics raved on that film. I thought it was just, I watched half of it and I was moderately interested. I got bored and turned it off. But you got this girl who's 8 years old running around, beating up and slashing up and killing these grown men, and some of the men have got guns and stuff, and it's like, oh come on, am I supposed to take this seriously? And then I watched the movie, Kick-Ass. I've not seen Kick-Ass 2, but I watched Kick-Ass 1, and I enjoyed Kick-Ass 1 as a sort of comedy. But again, at the end of the movie, you've got a girl who's like 10 or 12 years old, running down a hallway with guns, a gun in each hand, a handgun in each hand, jumping around and shooting and killing these guys. And like the recoil of the handgun, she can just hold the gun and there's no problem, and it doesn't make her hand move out the way and stuff. And she wasn't even a real superhero. She was supposed to be an everyday girl who acts like a superhero, dresses like a superhero, but isn't one. And then suddenly they make her into an actual superhero at the end of the movie and have her running around shooting grown men and having a fist fight with a big scary grown guy and winning. And that's how dumb it's gotten. I mean, what are we going to have next? Are we going to have 4 and 5 year olds? Are we going to have toddlers jumping around beating up grown men or grown women even? The stuff is just getting so stupid. And I'm finding that, not just for myself, I've heard a lot of other men say this, that they're actually switching off a lot of modern action movies because of this level of stupidity and unrealism in terms of the physical strengths of either women or children, and the deliberate attempts to play down the fact that men are generally the physically strongest of the two sexes. There's no doubt about that. You can't deny it. It's not a sexist point of view. It is a fact. In terms of muscular mass and so on, men do have a stronger physique in that respect and thus are much more capable of violence. But then women have got much better immune systems than men. So, these kinds of things, they balance out in different ways. Women live longer than men and so on. But a lot of guys are switching off most modern action movies because of these things. They go and watch Mad Max Fury Road, and suddenly it's like the Max character has been played down, and it's like, here's a female character with one arm who can almost beat Mad Max in a physical fight, despite only having one arm and so on. And I think some people christened the movie Mad Max Furiosa because it was more about her than him. It's like, hold on, this is a Mad Max movie. All the previous Mad Max movies, the central aspect of the story was Mad Max character himself, and suddenly he's being sidelined in his own movie series. So yeah, a lot of people didn't like that, and the efforts at feminism in the Fury Road film was like yawn, just cliched to death. And we're getting that with a lot of this stuff, and I'm hearing people making jokes about, we're going to have a female James Bond next, and so on. People are making these jokes because they do see that this is going on with movies, that strong male characters are disappearing, although, like I say, in my opinion, strong characters are disappearing altogether, and the efforts to try and make women seem stronger are actually falling flat on the face. But a lot of people are switching off action movies, and personally, I've been going back to the old action movies. I mean, I've still got my old action movies. I'll go back and watch all of my 70s and 80s action films, or even 60s action films like The Dirty Dozen. I mean, there were even action films made back in the day that didn't even have any female characters in. Like The Thing, there's no female characters in that movie. Would you ever get that today? They remake The Thing. They call it a prequel, but it was actually a shoddy remake. They try to take that brilliant character of R.J. McCready and replace him with a female character. And when the filmmakers were interviewed about this, they said, we didn't know how to top the R.J. McCready character, and any male playing him would have to compete with that character and it wouldn't work, so we decided, let's make it a female. Nah, that's a lame excuse. Come up with a new lead character, and you don't have to make it a female to make it work. You could have had a male character who had different kinds of strengths. You could have made him specifically a scientist. There was all kinds of ways that could have been done. So yeah, a lot of us are switching off and going back to the old action movies, and I've been doing this. I've been going back and watching old action movies that I've never even seen, old gangster movies from the 1930s and 40s. I'm going back and watching old westerns from the 1950s and 60s trying to find decent action movies, and hopefully along the way some decent, strong characters, whether it's male or female. But in particular, if we find strong male characters in those old movies, that fills a gap to what exists now. And I think that's a kind of problem for the studios that seem to be doing this thing of trying to play down male strengths, and play up female strengths in a way that doesn't match reality. They're alienating their audiences, and those audiences who are largely male, even young males that I've known who are in the 20s, are saying, nah, I'm not interested in all this modern stuff, I'm going to go back and watch the old classics. And they're coming back to me on a regular basis and saying, oh, I've just seen this movie from 1972, it was amazing, it starred this guy and what a fantastic role he played, and blah 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 blah. So I think this is sort of, it's not that I believe that there's a conspiracy among the studios to remove strong male characters. I think it's just sort of a cultural trend that we're all stuck in at the moment, the denial of male strengths. And as Jordan Peterson has been aptly pointing out in many of his lectures and stuff, there seems to be a bit of a cultural war against males in general from certain politicised groups of society. I don't think it's a large conspiracy. I think there are small groups who do have a conspiratorial element in that, but I think it's a larger cultural issue at the moment. So let me just go through my notes here and add some other thoughts about this. I wrote down the term unconscious bias here because we get unconscious bias training being done in companies. These so-called experts go in and they say, oh, well, you're all subconsciously biased against black people or Asian people or against women and so on. And if you don't accept our programs for engineering how your workforce is made up, then it's because you're subconsciously racist, bigoted and so on. Well, I would actually call that back on those people and say that they have a subconscious bias of subconsciously disliking, hating even males. Whether it's young males or older males. And I think that subconscious bias is showing in the way that a lot of movies are put together today. It's a major problem. It's funny that a lot of that subconscious bias isn't necessarily from women. A lot of it's from men. There are a lot of men around today who've bought into this stupid idea that men are like this scourge on society who need to be suppressed and held down. It's funny this, a lot of these so-called politically correct movements, a lot of the people who hate white people the most are actually white themselves, which is so weird. And a lot of people who hate males the most are males themselves. It's funny. I've actually had some people accuse me of being a feminist in the comments on some of my videos, because there have been places where I've talked about women's issues, women's rights and so on. I also talk about men's rights and so on now and then, but because I occasionally talk about the issues that affect women and how those things could be addressed, suddenly certain males perceive me as being a feminist. It's like, hold on, wait. I've talked against modern feminism in many ways, and yet you're calling me a feminist. I don't know. But I do think there's a subconscious bias against men from a lot of people today. I don't know. What else have we got here? Made some notes on the next page. This is another sort of thought I had about this, is that... put that down a minute. Okay, strong men, as in not necessarily physical strength, but strong personality, respectable, worthy men are disappearing from fiction movies. But they're not disappearing in the real world. This is an interesting dynamic. I'm seeing one of them go down while the other goes up. There are a lot of men out there who are doing really fantastic stuff in the world at the moment, who are going out there and being courageous and getting involved in things. I mentioned Jordan Peterson before. He is doing a great job at talking about this whole issue of men's rights and women's rights and the differences between men and women. He's been doing a fantastic job on that. So to me, he's like a strong male. He's not Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's not going around beating people up. He doesn't carry guns, but he's showing courage and strength in going out and fighting for those things. And I think there are plenty of strong males out there in the world, and I meet them every day. Well, not every day, but I meet them in everyday life. Men who've got conviction, courage, character, intelligence in ways that we are not seeing in movies. I'm seeing that all the time in real life, and I'm wondering where all that's going. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with that. Strong men are popping up in the real world just as much as they ever did, in my opinion. They're not getting the credit always necessarily from the media for their strengths and their conviction and their values, but they are out there and they are affecting things and getting involved. And yet they're disappearing from movies. And I don't know how this is going to work out. I can definitely see more and more that males across the board are going to be switching off to a lot of fiction movies because of this. They're not going to switch off to all fiction movies. I mean, movies that come out that are on quite different subjects, whether it's a horror film like Hereditary. I think a lot of guys will still go out and watch a movie like that, or a movie like Upgrade, which is like quite a clever science fiction film. But when it comes to action movies and tough guy movies, a lot of guys are just going to switch off more and more and more, and they're going to be talking more and more about the old classics. And so as these new movies try to play men down, the old classics are going to be elevated more and more by comparison. I mean, in a way, I've kind of been doing that with my film analysis over the years. I haven't been consciously doing it regarding men's and women's issues, but I've been doing some greatest screen heroes videos from time to time, and I did do one on Ellen Ripley as well, so they're not restricted to males. But a lot of the greatest screen hero characters that I've been talking about in my videos have been from older movies. And so that's what I think is going to happen, is that the suppression on one side at the moment is going to result in the old classic movie heroes, the ones who were really like respectable male characters. Those ones are just going to be elevated more and more and become more and more mythical in the minds of men. And the people who don't want that to happen won't be able to stop it. They're not going to be able to ban those movies. They can try and ignore those movies, pretend that they don't exist, but it ain't going to happen. And there's a lot of old classic movies that are still loved today, still highly critically appraised, but wouldn't get made today specifically because of this this constant push, whether it's subconscious or whether it's conscious, to try and play down men. Movies like The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, that was an all-male cast, not one woman in that film. That wouldn't be allowed these days. People would complain, well, not people, but certain idiots, ideologists, I don't really like ideologists personally, but they would be complaining and saying, oh, you need to have female characters in this. Or a movie like The Dirty Dozen, which, if I remember rightly, the only female characters who were in that movie were either the wives of Nazis at the end, who got blown up and killed as part of the attack by the lead characters. Or I think there was another scene in that movie where there was some hookers who were brought in to keep the main characters, the trainees, entertained. But those men acted like gentlemen and didn't sleep with them and just danced with them and drank with them. That was an interesting little aspect of that movie. But yeah, a movie like The Dirty Dozen, imagine if that came out now and all the complaints that would be, oh, there's not enough female characters in this. It's a war movie, and in wars, it's primarily always men. Occasionally there's some women involved in some way, but it's virtually always men who get given the guns and trained and sent into the battlefield to risk their lives and die. That is a historical fact. You can't get around that. So, a lot of these classic movies just wouldn't be made today because of these false efforts to try and play down the strengths of men. So yeah, I just thought I'd throw these thoughts out there. I didn't really plan the specifics of this video. I just had some basic ideas jotted down there on the subject. I'm interested to hear what you guys have got to say about it. I just felt it was something that I should talk about because I'm hearing so many guys talk about this both off and online. It's an issue that needs to be addressed. Let me know what you think.